Hattie Mae didn't clean the marble floors of Sterling Global because she was desperate. She did it because, to her, every job required discipline. The Chicago winter was howling against the reinforced glass of the skyscraper's lobby, a bitter wind that rattled the bones of anyone brave enough to walk the streets on Christmas Eve. Inside, however, the air was still, smelling faintly of pine and expensive floor wax. Hattie moved the mop in rhythmic, precise arcs, ignoring the sharp ache in her right knee. It was acting up again, a stubborn reminder of a desert storm decades ago that the doctors said would eventually cripple her. But Hattie didn't believe in eventually. She only believed in today. She paused near the entrance, her eyes drawn to the display stand in the corner. The American flag, usually standing proud next to the company banner, was tilted awkwardly to the left, its fabric bunched up against the pole. To most people rushing through the lobby, it was just a piece of cloth. To Hattie, it was a silent sentinel she had sworn to protect long before she ever picked up a mop. She leaned her handle against the wall and limped over, her movement slow but deliberate. With hands roughened by bleach and hard years, she gently adjusted the pole, smoothing out the stars and stripes with a reverence that looked almost like a prayer. She stepped back, nodding in satisfaction as the colors hung true. The revolving doors spun open with a rush of freezing air, signaling the arrival of Preston Sterling. The CEO marched in surrounded by a phalanx of assistants, his eyes glued to a tablet, his thumb scrolling furiously. He was a man who measured the world in profit margins and efficiency, and right now he was running late. He didn't see the wet floor sign Hattie had carefully placed. He didn't see Hattie. He only felt his Italian leather shoe catch on the yellow plastic easel, sending him stumbling forward. He caught himself on a marble pillar, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson as his entourage gasped. "For God's sake!" Preston barked, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. He spun around, his eyes landing on Hattie, who had already moved to steady the sign. "You. What is this doing in the middle of the walkway?" "It's a wet floor sign, Mr. Sterling," Hattie said, her voice low and calm. "I was just mopping the slush from the storm." Preston straightened his suit jacket, his embarrassment morphing instantly into aggression. He looked from the mop to the flag Hattie had just fixed. "Mopping? It looked to me like you were wasting time playing with the decorations while the floor is a death trap." He took a step closer, looming over her. The receptionist behind the desk lowered her head, terrified, but Hattie didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her hands clasped in front of her stained apron, where a tiny tarnished pin shaped like a silver wing caught the light. "I don't pay you to play patriot, Hattie," Preston sneered, his gaze flicking disdainfully over her graying hair and simple uniform. "I pay you to be invisible and clean up my mess. Look at this place. It's sloppy. Just like..." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the cold air. "Just like you." He checked his watch and scowled. "If this lobby isn't perfect by the time I come down for the gala, don't bother coming back after Christmas. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," Hattie replied, her expression unreadable. Preston scoffed, turning on his heel to bark orders at his assistant as they headed for the elevators. He didn't look back. He didn't see the fire that flashed momentarily in the old woman's eyes. Hattie grips her mop handle, her knuckles turning white, and whispers to herself, "I've faced men scarier than you, Mr. Sterling," as Preston storms toward the elevator. Preston thinks he's untouchable, but he has no idea who he just insulted. If you are already rooting for Hattie to teach this arrogance a lesson, please drop the number 8 in the comments below. Let's show some respect for the quiet heroes. And if you want to see exactly how karma strikes back, make sure you are subscribed to Black King and have that notification bell turned on. You definitely don't want to miss the moment the general walks through those doors. Your support helps us keep telling these powerful stories. Now, let's see just how much worse this day can get for Hattie. Gossip in a skyscraper travels faster than the elevators, and by lunch, everyone knew the CEO was on a warpath. The whispers bounced from the reception desk to the mailroom, carrying the tale of Preston Sterling's morning tantrum like a warning flare. Down in the basement break room, however, the noise of the corporate world was muffled by the hum of the vending machines and the smell of stale coffee. Hattie sat on a wobbly metal chair, her pant leg rolled up to reveal a jagged, pale scar running across her knee. The cold dampness of the basement made the old injury throb with a dull, persistent rhythm, a souvenir from a night when the desert sand had turned red. She opened a small tin of ointment, the smell of menthol momentarily overpowering the scent of floor wax that seemed to cling to her skin. The door creaked open, and Hattie quickly pulled her pant leg down. It was Emily Sterling, the CEO's daughter. Unlike her father, who wore his power like armor, Emily looked uncomfortable in her expensive cashmere coat. She hesitated at the threshold, clutching a paper cup of tea. I just wanted to apologize for this morning, Hattie, Emily said softly. My father, he's under a lot of pressure with the merger. It's not an excuse, I know. Hattie offered a tired but kind smile. Pressure reveals the man, Miss Emily. It doesn't change him. But thank you. She went back to smoothing her apron, her fingers lingering on the small silver pin fastened there. Emily stepped closer, her eyes catching the glint of metal. I've always wondered about that, she said, pointing to the winged sword. It looks so unique. Is it costume jewelry? Hattie's fingers covered the pin protectively, a reflex honed over years of silence. Something like that, Miss Emily, she replied, her voice dropping an octave. Just a souvenir from another life. Before Emily could press further, the break room intercom crackled to life, followed by the heavy thud of footsteps in the hallway. Preston Sterling burst in, his face flushed and frantic, looking completely out of place among the lockers and mop buckets. He didn't even glance at his daughter. There you are, he barked at Hattie, bypassing any greeting. The catering service is stuck on the I-90 in this blizzard. Half their staff can't make it. He threw a bundle of black fabric onto the table in front of her. I need bodies in the ballroom. Put this on. Hattie looked at the server's uniform, a black vest and bow tie, and then at Preston. Mr. Sterling, my shift ends at 4. And my leg. I'm not asking you to run a marathon, Hattie, Preston snapped, cutting her off. I'm paying double overtime. Just pour water, keep your head down, and stay out of the way. Unless you don't need the job. The threat hung in the air. Hattie thought of the heating bill waiting on her kitchen counter and the toy robot her grandson had circled in the catalog 3 times. She needed that money. Slowly, she reached out and took the uniform. I'll be there, sir. Preston didn't say thank you. He simply checked his watch and stormed out, the crisis momentarily managed in his mind. Hattie stood up slowly, the pain in her knee flaring as she put weight on it. She walked to the small cracked mirror above the sink. As Hattie puts on the black server's vest, she looks in the mirror. The reflection isn't just a janitor. For a second, the posture of a colonel returns. She is ready for the mission. The grand ballroom smelled of expensive pine, roasted duck, and the nervous sweat of a CEO trying to close a billion-dollar deal. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto the velvet-clad guests, while a jazz band played soft, unobtrusive holiday tunes in the corner. Preston Sterling stood near the ice sculpture, clutching a flute of champagne like a weapon. His eyes darted constantly to the mahogany double doors, checking his watch every 30 seconds. Tonight was the night he would secure the military defense contract that would cement his legacy, stepping out of his father's shadow once and for all. He adjusted his silk tie, rehearsing his pitch about synergy and modern warfare under his breath. When the doors finally swung open, General Douglas Vance stepped through, looking less like a guest and more like he was inspecting the perimeter. He wore a dress uniform that fit him with the ease of a second skin, rows of ribbons detailing a lifetime of service gleaming under the lights. Preston practically sprinted across the room to greet him, his smile wide and practiced. General Vance. An honor, truly. Welcome to Sterling Global. The general shook Preston's hand with a grip that was firm but brief. Mr. Sterling, Vance said, his voice gravelly. He scanned the room, his sharp eyes bypassing the luxury and seemingly looking for something else. I'm told you run a tight ship here. Though I admit, I'm mostly in Chicago looking for an old friend. Lost touch years ago. Preston laughed, a hollow booming sound. Well, you'll find plenty of friends here tonight, General. But first, let me introduce you to the board. We have some very exciting projections for the drone initiative. He steered the general toward the VIP table, oblivious to the man's disinterest. Hattie moved through the crowd like a shadow in her ill-fitting vest. Her knee was screaming in protest with every step, sending sharp jolts up her thigh, but her face remained a mask of polite service. She carried a heavy silver tray laden with crystal glasses of red wine and ice water, navigating the sea of elbows and animated gestures. As she approached the center table, a voice cut through the ambient noise, a deep, commanding baritone she hadn't heard in 20 years, yet recognized instantly. It was the voice that had called in coordinates over the roar of mortar fire. She froze. General Vance. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her discipline. She couldn't let him see her like this, not out of shame for her work, but because she knew him. If Douglas saw her limping in a server's uniform, he wouldn't see a janitor. He would see a debt he thought he couldn't repay, and he would make a scene. She tried to turn, to retreat to the kitchen, but Preston spotted her hesitation. He snapped his fingers loudly, the sound cracking like a whip. "You there. Hurry up with the drinks. The general is waiting." The shout startled her. Hattie pivoted too quickly. Her bad leg buckled under the sudden shift in weight. She reached out to steady herself, but the heavy silver tray tipped. Time seemed to slow down as the crystal glasses slid off the edge. The music stops. The room goes deathly silent. Preston's face turns purple with rage as he points a shaking finger at Hattie. "That is it. The music has stopped. The glass is shattered, and Hattie is standing in the eye of the storm. If you are on the edge of your seat waiting to see how she survives this, drop the number 8 in the comments right now to let me know you are watching. And before the yelling starts, make sure you are subscribed to Black King and have that notification bell turned on, because trust me, you do not want to miss the justice that is about to be served. Your support empowers us to keep telling these stories. Now, let's see how Preston reacts." The sound of shattering glass was nothing compared to the venom in Preston Sterling's voice as he screamed. Red wine dripped from the white tablecloth like a fresh wound, pooling around his expensive loafers, but the stain spreading across the atmosphere of the room was purely emotional. "You incompetent fool!" Preston roared, abandoning all pretense of sophistication. The veins in his neck bulged as he gestured wildly at the mess. "Look at this. You've ruined the evening." He lunged forward, his hand clamping onto Hattie's shoulder, roughly to shove her toward the exit. "I told you to stay out of the way. You are fired. Get out of my building now, and don't you dare ask for a paycheck." The physical contact flipped a switch deep inside Hattie. The pain in her knee vanished, replaced instantly by a cold, steel resolve forged in places far more dangerous than a Chicago ballroom. She didn't shove him back. She simply rotated her shoulder with a precise, practiced movement that broke his grip instantly. It was a defensive maneuver executed with such subtle efficiency that Preston stumbled back. Hattie stepped away, smoothing her vest with quiet dignity, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I am leaving, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice steady and cutting through the stunned silence of the room. "You do not need to touch me." She turned to limp away, head held high, refusing to let these people see tears of humiliation. The crowd parted, eyes wide, whispers of awkward and disaster following her retreat. General Vance, who had been dabbing wine from his dress uniform cuff, suddenly froze. His eyes locked onto the retreating figure, the specific rhythm of her limp, the set of her shoulders, and then the glint of the silver pin on her chest as she passed under the crystal chandelier. The winged sword. It was unmistakably the insignia of the 7th Covert Medical Battalion. "Wait," Vance whispered, then louder, his voice booming like a cannon shot across the silent hall. "Stand fast." The command was so authoritative that half the room straightened up by instinct. Preston blinked, confused, thinking the general was angry at the staff. "General, please ignore her. Security is on the way. She's just..." Vance shoved past the CEO as if he were a cardboard cutout. He moved with a speed that belied his 60 years, closing the distance to the double doors in seconds. "Colonel May," he shouted, the title echoing off the walls. Hattie stopped. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, took a breath, and turned slowly. Vance stopped 3 feet from her. He looked at the gray hair, the ill-fitting server's vest, and the weary lines on her face, but he saw the officer who had once dragged him through burning sand while mortar fire rained down. The room watched in breath-bated silence as the four-star general snapped his heels together with a sharp crack. He raised his right hand, fingers perfectly aligned, to his brow. It was not a casual wave. It was a salute of absolute, unwavering respect. "Colonel Hattie May," Vance said, his voice trembling with emotion. "My God. I haven't seen you since Operation Desert Storm." Preston stands with his mouth open, his hands still pointing at the door, as the most powerful man in the room bows his head to the janitor he just fired. Silence didn't just fall over the room. It crushed it, suffocating Preston Sterling's arrogance in a single second. The jazz band had stopped playing mid-note, the drummer holding his sticks in the air as if afraid to break the spell. Every eye in the room was glued to the surreal tableau, the billionaire CEO standing with his mouth agape, and the decorated general standing at attention before a woman in a stained server's vest. Slowly, General Vance lowered his salute, his eyes glistening with a mixture of relief and profound gratitude. He ignored the confused whispers rippling through the crowd and reached out to take Hattie's calloused hands in his own. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vance announced, his voice steady and projecting to the back of the hall without a microphone. "You might see a janitor standing here, but I see the Iron Angel of the 7th Battalion." He turned Hattie slightly so she faced the room, though she looked down, bashful under the sudden praise. 20 years ago, during a mortar attack that leveled our field hospital, this woman didn't run. She carried 3 wounded men out of the inferno on her back. And that limp you saw her struggling with. Vance glared at Preston, his gaze hardening into flint. "She earned that shattered knee shielding me from shrapnel. She gave up her mobility so I could keep my life." A collective gasp swept through the room. Guests who had previously looked through Hattie now looked at her with awe. Preston stammered, his face draining of color. "But, General, she's just cleaning staff. She never said a word. How was I supposed to know?" Vance turned on the CEO, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. "She didn't say anything because true heroes don't brag, Mr. Sterling. They serve. Unlike you, who seems to think power comes from a title and a corner office." Preston laughed nervously, trying to salvage the situation as he saw his board members exchanging worried glances. "Look, obviously there's been a misunderstanding. We can fix this. Hattie, Colonel May, you can have a raise. A promotion. Let's get back to the table and sign the papers, General. This is a big night for both of us." Vance looked at the contract lying on the table, right next to the spreading pool of spilled wine. He looked back at Hattie, who offered him a small, forgiving smile that he knew he didn't deserve, but Preston certainly didn't. "You're right, Preston," Vance said coolly. "It is a big night. It's the night I realized who I was almost doing business with." The general picked up the thick document. The room watched, paralyzed, as he deliberately tore the contract in half with a sharp, tearing sound that echoed like a gunshot. He didn't stop there. He dropped the shredded pages directly into the puddle of red wine on the floor. The paper curled and soaked up the liquid, turning a bloody crimson ruined, just like the evening. "I don't do business with men who have no honor," Vance stated, wiping his hands as if cleaning off dirt. "The deal is off." Preston watches his billion-dollar deal dissolve in a puddle of Merlot, realizing he just lost everything because he judged a book by its cover. The party was over for Preston Sterling, but for Hattie May, a new chapter was just beginning. General Vance offered Hattie his arm, ignoring the whispers and the flash of smartphone cameras that were undoubtedly recording the downfall of Chicago's most arrogant CEO. As they walked toward the exit, the crowd of wealthy elites parted like the Red Sea, not out of fear, but out of a newfound reverence. Emily Sterling stood near the doorway, her eyes wet with tears. She didn't follow her father's frantic attempts to salvage the night. Instead, she caught Hattie's eye and nodded respectfully, a silent apology passed between two women who understood that integrity couldn't be bought. Down in the lobby, the silence was peaceful compared to the chaos upstairs. As they passed the display stand near the revolving doors, General Vance paused. He looked at the American flag, now standing perfectly straight and proud, its colors vibrant against the snowy backdrop of the night. He looked at Hattie, a knowing smile touching his lips. "Still looking out for the colors, I see. Even when no one is watching." Hattie chuckled, the sound warm and devoid of the bitterness she had every right to feel. Old habits, General. You protect what matters, no matter what uniform you're wearing. They stepped out into the biting cold, but Hattie didn't feel the chill. A sleek black limousine was waiting at the curb, engine purring. The driver hurried to open the door, treating the woman in the server's vest with the same deference he would a head of state. Before she got in, Vance turned to her. I heard you mention a grandson earlier. The Army has a scholarship fund for the families of distinguished veterans. I'd like to make sure May never has to worry about tuition again. Hattie's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. General, that's too much. It's the least we can do, he insisted gently. Suddenly, the revolving doors spun violently. Preston Sterling burst out onto the sidewalk, breathless and shivering in his suit, snowflakes instantly melting on his flushed face. Hattie! Colonel! Wait! He ran toward them, desperation etched in every line of his face. Please, I didn't know who you were. I was stressed. I can make this right. Hattie stopped, one hand on the open car door. She turned to look at the man who had looked down on her for years. She didn't yell. She didn't demand an apology. She simply looked at him with a calm, devastating clarity. You didn't need to know my rank to treat me like a human being, Preston. Merry Christmas. Hattie gets into the General's limousine. As the car drives away into the snowy night, Preston is left standing alone in the cold lobby, reflected in the marble floor he made her clean.